we thought, quite honestly, that as Freddie was going to try to slide this car around a corner, he would break the wheel off. About a year ago, Freddie, Tavares Hernandez, Tyler Hoover, and myself decided that we wanted to play Top Gear, and we came up with this premise called Car Trek, and it was all made possible through a sponsor called Auto Tempest. Obviously, we're all buying cars all the time, usually terrible examples of really cool cars, at least in my case, and so Auto Tempest was a perfect sponsor because that's who we use to search for cars. They allow you to search all the major car listing sites at the same time, and so it was the perfect sponsor to kind of propose the challenges for each of the Car Trek series. So for Car Trek 1, the goal was to find the coolest car we could for the price of a C8 Corvette. And I bought a flood title Lamborghini Gallardo Spider for $59,000, the perfect car for the challenge, but it was very, very close to not being ready in time. It needed a lot of work beforehand, which we kind of, all the cars need some work beforehand, but we don't make a big deal out of that. But this one I wasn't sure was gonna make it. So I had to buy a backup car. And I told the story of that. It was a 2010 Lamborghini Gallardo Spider with 104,000 miles. Absolute piece of garbage, but it was perfect for the premise as a backup. It would have worked as a first car, but I really didn't know which car I was gonna take until right before I left. And I ended up taking the originally planned gated manual flood car. I love that car. I still have it today. As soon as I got back, I sold the Gallardo. But right as we were about to begin filming, Freddie's Aston broke in a pretty catastrophic way. It blew two of the hydraulic lines. It was a V12 Vantage S, and that paddle shift transmission would never work with a big leak in that system. Now, fortunately, after a few hours of working, Freddie and Jared were able to repair that car. In that few hours, I'm going kind of frantically back and forth trying to figure out, do we need to send somebody back up 6 hours to Atlanta from Orlando where we were starting and use that car for Freddie, or were we gonna need to buy another Aston Martin locally? Because it didn't really seem like something that could be easily fixed. Beyond that, the power steering pump sounded like it was about to explode, so Freddie's car was in a bad shape. And so at the end of that filming, even though we were able to fix the Aston, we learned that we need a real backup car. Now, when Top Gear does these cheap car challenges or these long road trips, in almost every case, they have multiples of each car. Or they've used someone like John Ficarra to outsource all the car wrangling. Regardless, the guys never pick their own cars. They're not out shopping and buying and prepping cars. They're presented to them, and then they're presented to the audience as though they brought them. But usually the cars are properly gone through. Everything is done to make them truly reliable, and all of the failures are planned. Now, we don't know what we're doing, and we certainly don't have the ability to buy multiples of each car or plan the exact failures of them. We're actually going out there and seeing what happens. And so in Car Trek 1, all the failures of the Gallardo were absolutely legitimate. But as we started to look towards Car Trek 2, with the premise being the most appreciated supercars we could find, we knew that we needed a fourth car as a backup, not a duplicate of one of them like I'd done in the first one with the Gallardo, because it was just as likely that any of us could need them as one of us would need it. And so I was bringing the Colombian Aston Martin Vanquish. I had found a manual transmission Maserati coupe that Freddie insisted on having, and Tyler had found on eBay through Auto Tempest a CL65. Not exactly a supercar, but at least we had pretty good confidence that it would make it. However, if anything significant on that car broke, it wasn't something we were gonna be able to limp along. So we started looking at what would another car be. But really we kept gravitating towards something that was reasonably affordable, had supercar level performance in the same way the CL65 isn't a supercar, this wasn't a supercar, but it was a BMW M6 with the 5-liter V10, a pretty heralded motor, but with a lot of reliability issues. And because of those issues, the car was catastrophically depreciated. And so I was able to find one that had like a $104,000 sticker for just around $9,000. And was shopping through Auto Tempest, found a local listing, in fact, which was wildly convenient. And as I start looking, I recognized the seller as being an old friend of mine. He organizes a car show for all sorts of tuner import cars. I've been to it a few times. And so he has a dealership where he sells a lot of older M cars, and he had this 2007 BMW M6 with 140,000 miles on it. So I call him, he tells me a bit about it. He had picked it up at an auction, I think for like $7 grand, and the clutch had failed and the headlights were failing, and so he had done some work, and so he's like, look, I own it for about $9. You can have it for that if you want. It's gonna take a couple more weeks. And I said, that is perfect. It was a pretty well-maintained car, but we knew very little about it. Now, of course, on these cars, you have to plan on replacing the rod bearings or they will fail. And there's a car that I owned in the past. I actually bought it, I guess, in 2014, right after we had our son, because I felt like I needed to have a car with a back seat that you could put a car seat in, and I didn't have any other cars that wouldn't constitute strapping him to a fuel cell from one of the Cannonball cars. And so I bought a 2006 BMW M5. And the only reason I was personally comfortable with owning that car was because it had $48,000 of warranty receipts from the prior year. These cars total themselves because the engines fail, they spin a rod because the rod bearings fail. It's something that they all seem to do. It's a fairly common problem on BMWs in general. The E46 M3 that I just sold in our car flipping contest had just had the rod bearings done because it was popping a check engine light. It's just one of those things that you know. Additionally, on these SMG BMWs, you're gonna have clutch failure, pump failure, fluid leaks, all the things that you expect. And so while this car was currently running and we could see that the engine had been resealed, which probably indicated rod bearings, we didn't really know what had been done. Also, it had a very entertaining number of faults. The park distance control was bad, the headlight leveling was bad, increased emissions, check engine light, but it did pass emissions. It had a gas cap tightness error, all sorts of things. So lots of lights on, entertaining for filming, but the car was generally a pretty solid driving car. Had the muffler deleted, sounded pretty good, and they're cool looking cars. I mean, when you think about it, they were a great new car. A lot of people were really excited when the V10 BMWs came out. Of course, now they have a stigma attached to them and people are really, really afraid of owning them. Now, of course, this next bit's going to spoil the premise of Car Trek 2. If you haven't already seen it, please go watch it. It's on Freddie Tavarish's channel. But we did end up needing the M6. Now, the general premise with a backup car is that the cars may not make it to the start. Like, we're trying to get these cars ready, ship them across the country, tow them in the case of the Maserati, and we don't know until the very last minute if the cars are actually going to be ready. So the point of the backup car is to just step in and be as though that is the car that this person decided to bring. So I didn't know if the Aston was going to make it. Freddie didn't know if the Maserati was going to make it. We had a pretty good confidence in the CL because it's a Mercedes product and it wasn't currently limping along through any errors. And so we have the M6 there and we're just kind of waiting to see. But all the cars perform pretty well. However, in the first inspection of the Maserati by the car wizard, which we were already kind of aware of this issue, we found that the rear wheel on the passenger side was so loose that it literally could fall off. And so as we headed out to Spring Mountain Motorsports Park, we thought quite honestly that as Freddie was going to try to slide this car around a corner, he would break the wheel off. And that would be that, and that would be a catastrophic failure, and then we would immediately need the M6. As it turned out, Freddie spun it around many times, slid it pretty hard, didn't have any issues, laid down the fastest lap time, and so we didn't need the M6 at that moment. However, a very short time later, a minor electrical fire happened, and that was going to be a pretty significant rewiring to part of the harness. A lot of it was melted, and so that was going to take Freddie and Jared quite a bit of time to try to fix. So the M6 comes in. Now, of course, in the storyline, we have to introduce how the M6 came about. We can't make it seem like we knew one of these cars was going to break. And so we create this shtick where I'm on a phone shopping Auto Tempest in Vegas and buying the car in that moment. And of course, that wasn't exactly how it happened. We already had the car. But the next morning, Tyler and I decorate the car sort of like a Maserati and present it to Freddie as a gift. And we go about the next bit of challenges. And so that was to take the car out to the desert. Of course, none of us really love the M6, particularly relative to a manual transmission Maserati, a super cool car, and so Freddie wasn't very excited to be out of his first choice car and into the M6, and he was rather abusive to the car as we're sliding it around a dry lake bed. Of course, the temperature starts to creep up, more error lights are popping on, but it does hold together and survive pretty well. We do the baby crying challenge, and we try to cook something on the hood, which was actually made quite easy because prior to leaving, I had all the cars coated with Avalon King ceramic coating. In fact, if you click the link in the description below, you can get a great deal on a DIY Avalon King Armor Shield 9 ceramic coating kit. So that meant that the chicken didn't stick to the hood as we were trying to cook it. Of course, that's not the primary use of Avalon King, but it does work for that. So we had a lot of fun with that challenge and obviously found a lot of ways to tie in Auto Tempest, and we certainly appreciated them for making this all possible. Now, that being said, they don't give us a budget to buy all of these cars and never see them again. We have to not lose all that much money on them, and this M6 was in pretty sorry shape at the end of it. So, you know, they help us with the production cost. In fact, CarTrek 1 wouldn't have been possible if it hadn't been for the fact that in late 2019, I had pre-sold all of our 2020 sponsor placements in order to raise money to buy the Mercy SV that was illegally imported from Canada into China and being sold without any paperwork. I was really excited about that car. I'll tell you more about that later. Of course, it never ended up happening, but that meant that I had raised the money that I could sort of float all the car purchases for the first series. Now, we were using cheaper-ish cars for CarTrek 2, but we still didn't want to lose all that much money in them. And so we'll talk more about where the cars ended up. You may see some more of the Aston Martin Vanquish, but we needed to get rid of this M6 at the end of it. And John Ficarra, who came in to appraise all the cars at the end after Freddie had resurrected the Maserati, you know, buys the Maserati on screen, but as he really started evaluating that car, he didn't like it at all. And Tyler had a friend who wanted to start making YouTube videos with it, so it went with him. And Ficarra decides that he wants to buy the M6 as his means to get home. Of course, it goes about 200 miles before refusing to restart at a gas stop, and it does need gas stops all the time. That is actually the thing that I hate most about those M5s and M6s. They get terrible gas mileage, but everything I own gets terrible gas mileage, but everything else has a larger tank. They have like a 15.5, 16-gallon tank, so you're gonna stop for gas every 150 miles. Maybe 100 miles if you drive the car really hard. So it just makes the cars really, really hard to use, despite the fact that they're really comfortable. I drove the M6 around a good bit before we took it out there to Vegas to film, but none of us were really excited to bring it back home, so we were glad that Ficarra wanted it, and you all saw that he recently sold that car. So again, it was a great backup car. It fit exactly what we needed. It did its job, it did its thing, and then it went on to a better place. And I can't wait to see through the VINwiki app what the future owners continue to do with the car. That's one of the most interesting things about our app, is the chance to see what happens to cars down the road. So be sure to download the app, follow the M6, see what becomes of it, see what happens to all the other CarTrek cars. The Gallardo that I had as a backup car ended up being wrapped in green. It's now with its new owner. It's well past 100,000 miles, obviously, but it's still running very, very strong. So we're thankful to Auto Tempest for making CarTrek possible, and I'm excited to say that we just finished recording CarTrek 3, which will air as our Christmas special in December, so be on the lookout for that on Freddie's channel. Go rewatch CarTrek 1, CarTrek 2, because we have an awful lot of fun making them. And thank you to our current sponsor, Policy Genius, for supporting this month of VINwiki Car Stories. It may seem like homeowners insurance and car insurance are really boring products that you can't really get a great deal on, but they can help. They shop through all the major carriers and find you the best policy for the best price. They even do it automatically every time each of your policies needs to renew. They save you money if you bundle both, but they can save you money on either one. So be sure to visit the link in the description below, give them a little bit of information about yourself and about your property, and they'll tell you if you're getting the best deal or not. They make switching easy, and they take great care of you, and thank them for their support of VINwiki.